Welcome. I am Dr. Hallerman, and this is Growing Down Through Soulbriety. Today, my guest is Laura Cathcart Robbins. She is the best-selling author of the Atria Simon & Schuster memoir, Stash, My Life in Hiding, and the host of the popular podcast, The One and Only in the Room. She's been active for many years as a speaker and a school trustee and is credited for creating the Buckley School's nationally recognized Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Her recent articles on the subject of race, recovery, and divorce have garnered her worldwide acclaim. Good morning.
Good morning, Elisa.
Good morning, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me. I really just enjoy having you in my world now. And we met very early on because we had books coming out at the exact same time in this new genre we're calling, what are we calling it?
Quit lit.
Quit lit.
Yes.
And we're sticking to it.
That's right.
And I got a chance to read your book early and heard you speak. And I'm just so impressed with your story and so also impressed with you that you went and wrote a book, because you write in the book, and you've talked about it many times, that when you were going through what you were going through, and I'll let you tell the audience, but that there was nothing out there that represented you. And I want you to talk about that, because it's one thing to have to get sober, and it's another thing to not feel connected to some sort of group or person or something. And then it's a whole other, courageous thing to write about it and say, hey, this wasn't there for me, and I want this to be there for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I mean, I just have to say that I felt the same way when I read your book, not about the otherness, but just like, I need to know this person better. And so then, then we had you come on our podcast, and I got to talk to you more, and then we've connected several times since. And I also am very grateful for that connection. And thank you for highlighting this issue. And I have kind of this dual experience where I have grown up Black in white spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll preface that by saying that both my parents are Black. My extended family is Black. So I did not grow up in a blended family, but I went to schools that were primarily white. The workplaces of my parents were primarily white.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this dual life growing up. The other thing that my parents, who were hippies,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny to look back on now. I don't think there really are hippies anymore in cities, but they're
Right.
like in rural areas. But my parents were city hippies, and they really instilled in me that Black was the most beautiful thing I could be. And so I believed it. I believed it. And despite the messaging that I got from television and magazines and what I saw in these spaces I grew up in, I kept that idea that I was never less than. I didn't ever want to be anything other than what I was. I was very comfortable with my Blackness, but I was also very comfortable in white spaces, or spaces where there was a dominant culture that wasn't Black. And so all that to say, that continued on through my adult life. And when I found myself battling this addiction, with my kids who were little at that time, I was going through a divorce.
How old were they?
They were going on 8 and 9.
Okay.
And they turned 8 and 9 throughout this process, but they were, yeah, little munchkin men then. And so, I had this very big outside life at their predominantly white school. I have just been named the Parent Association president. We didn't call it the PTA, we called it Parent Association. And
Fancier at private schools.
fancier. And I have been asked to join the board of this school, which was a very prestigious ask and appointment.
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, I was battling this addiction, and the addiction was to a sleeping medication called Ambien, which most people have heard of now, but it wasn't very popular then.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it was, but it wasn't discussed the way that it's discussed now. People don't just like, oh, do you need an Ambien? Or they
Right,
didn't say that then.
right. Oh, do you need a Tic Tac? I mean,
Yeah,
an Ambien?
exactly. And so that was very secret for me. It was a very secret thing. I kept this to myself because my thinking was that my Ambien, my sleep allowed me to show up for my life. So it was a non-negotiable. I wasn't giving that up.
Right. And
So
is that how it
yeah,
started? Someone gave it to you, you were having trouble sleeping?
exactly. It actually started with what I believe was undiagnosed postpartum anxiety.
Got it.
And I didn't have that language then. I didn't know,
Right, of course.
postpartum looked like depression as far as I knew, and I wasn't depressed. But what I had was this inability, like every single pre-waking whimper that either of my kids would make, I was up and I couldn't go back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would like drag myself through the day. They were what we call spirited children now.
Mm-hmm.
They were both really energetic boys
Right.
and needed a lot of attention, and I gave it to them, but really at a cost to me. So when I
Mm-hmm.
was able to sleep with the help of Ambien, I thought that was the panacea. Like I had found the magic thing that was going to let me live my life and show up the way that I wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, for so many of us, whatever our addiction is, whether it's drug or substance or alcohol or behavioral, it's the solution initially. And
Yes.
then it becomes the problem. So when did you start to have that moment where you thought, hmm, maybe this is more than just helping me sleep?
I mean, I took it for 6 years, and the first couple years I was able to take it as prescribed, and I wasn't fixated on it or obsessing about it. I didn't think counting down the hours until I could take my Ambien.
Hmm.
But somewhere in that third year, I built up a pretty good tolerance to it. So I needed more in order to get to sleep. And then I was waking up in the middle of the night. So I would take like a half an Ambien or a quarter of an Ambien. Um, and that's when I started to experience withdrawals.
Hmm.
I would have what I think is clinically called rebound insomnia. So
Hmm.
if I didn't take my Ambien, I would be more awake and more agitated.
Yeah.
Um, and so it became imperative that I have it. This was no longer just a casual thing that could help me. This was like, I'm going to be in pain if I don't take it.
Hmm. It's so interesting because some people get addicted to a substance or something because they're like seeking it out in order to make themselves feel better. And I imagine you were having this anxiety that you spoke of. You went to a doctor. They said, take this sleeping medicine. And you had no idea what could possibly transpire. And it's often something that we don't talk about as much. I mean, we talk about people having a genetic disposition, and maybe you do, maybe looking back, you can speak to it more, hindsight's 2020 to what was going on before. But that being said, that was a perfect example of a doctor just not understanding and giving you that information that this was not to be a long-term solution.
Right, right. It really was. And I do like to kind of clear my doctor in this because his
Mhm,
intention in giving it to me was good. I
mhm.
presented to him at that time as on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And he was like, let's get you sleeping so we can figure out what's going on. And and then, once, and the other thing that I will say is as soon as when I took that first Ambien,
Mhm.
I knew
Mhm.
instinctively that I was going to have to hide how much I enjoyed it.
Okay.
I knew that, but I didn't know why, and I've
Right.
done that with different things like chocolate, right? Like
Right.
I love chocolate. I always had a stash of chocolate.
Right.
It wasn't something that, people would be like, oh, you're an addict because you have a stash of chocolate. So I kind of thought it was around the same thing with the Ambien.
Uh-huh.
I was like, I just need to keep this to myself
Right.
because this is better than anything I've ever tried. And I had tried a lot of drugs. Going back to your point, um, I I had done a lot of things. I had done opiates, I had done cocaine, starting in my early 20s, I was a social drinker. And this is why I thought I wasn't an addict. I
Mm-hmm.
thought because, and I had a problem with smoking cocaine when I was 19 years old. And it was about a year where I would smoke it recreationally, which sounds odd, but it really was.
It was just a thing.
It was just a thing on the weekends, and I never did it during the week and it didn't interfere with my life. But the weekend started to start on Friday night and go to Sunday instead of just like a Saturday.
Right.
And then I stopped. When I was challenged to do so, I stopped. So I thought for sure I'm not an alcoholic or an addict because,
Right. Right.
right?
They would never be able to do that. I think
Yeah,
it was like the perfect storm of the withdrawal symptoms and the needing more and the building up tolerance and then getting sick, which is what happens to a lot of people. Your
yeah,
body starts to need it, not just psychologically or emotionally, but physically.
yes. And I write, it's on the flap jacket bio of Stash, My Life in Hiding, which is the memoir that you were talking about. And I say that, I discovered that privilege doesn't protect you from pain. Because in my mind, I always thought that once I get the stuff, and, in my book, I write about all the stuff that I had, which was everything that I ever thought that I wanted at
Right.
that time.
Right.
Yet I was in this really, really just excruciating cycle, this spree and remorse cycle that I couldn't get myself out of,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the trainers and chefs and private plane flights and all the stuff that I had, nannies, housekeepers couldn't make it any better.
Right.
And that's when I started looking, which is the question that you asked me at first. I started looking for a book that I could discreetly read and figure out how to navigate this thing, right?
Right.
And I found books, but none of them were written by Black women or women of color for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that
You're
was
so right. I mean, I've gone on to look in the bookstore and I'm like, she's right. There is nothing. And I'll be honest, like, even when I got sober, I thought, okay, but I have all this stuff. It's kind of inappropriate for me to feel like I can't get this under control. I
yeah,
have all of these things. I should be happy. I should be this. I should be that. I have no excuses. And I think that's why it felt so important for myself, speaking of someone that was coming from a place of privilege as well, to say it has nothing to do with what you have on the outside. It is a feeling of soul loss on the inside, and it doesn't matter what you have. And I think that's so important because it's so easy to say, oh, well, his life was this, or he did that, or he lived here, or he hadn't worked in a year, or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
But to look at someone and go, really? Her? Why? And especially women.
Yeah, I mean, and I fall into that, excuse me, I fall into that trap as well. I look at people like I was talking about Mark Wahlberg the other day because I just saw him in a movie. I was
Mhm.
like, his body is like the same as it's been for like 15 years.
Right?
And then I go, yeah, but he has a personal trainer and, he probably has a chef and blah, blah, blah. But, the fact is he works really hard at it, I'm sure.
A hundred
And
percent.
maybe there's a genetic, thing as well. But I take people's inventory is my point,
Yeah.
based on what the stuff that I see them have. And I
Yeah.
either credit or dismiss something on that basis,
Yeah.
right?
I've never
And
thought
yeah,
to do that. And poor Mark, he works out like no one I've ever seen, eats like no one I've ever seen. And even if you watch his Instagram, he's up at 4 in the morning working out.
yeah, see? Yeah. Yeah. No
Four.
discipline. That's crazy. I mean, that's not crazy. That's
That's how you look like that.
that's how you look like that. If that's what you want, that's what you do,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Um, so yeah, I wrote Stash 12 years after I got sober,
Mm-hmm.
because 12 years later, there still wasn't a book written
Mm,
by a person of color
unbelievable.
in this particular category. Let me also say that there obviously Black people and people of color have written books over the years about their troubles with addiction, but I'm talking currently on the shelves. I'm talking something that made a splash,
Right.
where people are talking about it, where it's on some best of lists.
Yeah.
There just aren't books written by people of color in this genre. I wanted to ask you what you think about quit lit, because to me it sounds like chick lit, which feels like it's categorized for women.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I personally don't love it. I think it
Yeah.
sounds kitschy, and I think we deserve better.
Yes.
And it's more than, here's all the other thing I thought of. I'm glad you're asking, is that quitting, quitting's easy.
Mm,
Staying quit is what we're talking about.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I just feel like anyone can quit, and lots of people do, and I did as well. It's staying quit that's so impossible. It just feels broader and deeper. And I mean, you know me, I'm like right to soul, right to growing down. So I'm like, quit lit feels a little surfacey to me.
Yeah, so maybe, I mean, it is the genre title that we've been given by the Washington Post.
I
Almost,
call.
yeah. What's
What
that
do I
again?
need? What do I need to call?
I don't know. I think maybe we just need to coin it,
Yeah,
whatever it is, right? And then pitch it to somebody so they can write an article saying
exactly.
these women are reclaiming Quitlet and rebranding it as this because it makes more sense or something. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yes, that is on our agenda. We're doing that.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it's exclusive then because of the female connotation to,
Agreed.
and it shouldn't be. Like some of my favorite books are written by men like Augustin Burroughs,
Mm-hmm.
who I love, love, love. I read dry until my eyes were dry,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
over and over and over again. So
I
um
agree. I love
yeah,
some of the male books. It didn't really matter because you know what? It's even you can identify with the feelings. It's
yeah.
not about male, female, privilege, not privileged, color, any age, none
Mhm.
of it. It's
Yeah.
really just about the feelings that are the same for each and every one of us.
Yeah. And that thing in particular that you just said about the feelings is how I've navigated my recovery for going on 16 years.
Hmm.
It's like I walk into a room and maybe it's full of men. So I come in as myself, but I just connect to what they're saying. And I'm talking about rooms of recovery, like where people are, what do they call it? Sober, helping friends. I don't know. But um but walking into these rooms, and sometimes it is like a group of people that I don't belong to, but I
Hmm.
can still connect with those feelings. And that's how I've gone around and navigated recovery. And that's how I try to approach literature in recovery now, is just to connect with the feelings. But at the same time, you know, when I started looking for books on sobriety, I thought maybe this isn't for Black people.
Hmm.
Maybe this isn't for people of color because all I see are white women writing
Wow.
about the subject. And maybe this isn't something culturally that we do, which is really wrong. And I know
Really wrong.
better, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but I didn't see anything that represented it.
Hmm. Well, that's why I was so, I mean, obviously the writing, obviously your story, and we have a similar circle of friends. So I was interested and wanted to know and wanted to know more about you, but so blown away and wanted to always highlight you and always keep you at the forefront of any of my conversations as have you read Stash? Have you read Stash? Because I think it is so important. And it is also my responsibility to help you get the book out there. And I think that was a very interesting concept for me when I wrote the book, that there were some people that were just like, this is so important, everyone needs to know. And there's some people that are like, I'm just going to keep to my own thing over here. And I just don't live like that. I don't understand that. I was just like, oh my God, go girl. Like, is she like your best friend? I'm like, no. I'm like, but I get her. I get her.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was talking to Scott. Scott's my partner and my co-host on the podcast and
Yes.
my boyfriend, which is just such a weird word to use after 50. But
And tell everyone where you met your boyfriend,
yeah, so Scott and I met the hour I checked into treatment.
which is
Um,
so not what you're supposed to do.
no, do not try this at home, folks. But yeah, we just happened to have checked in at the same time. In July, it'll be 16 years. We
Amazing.
both checked into treatment at the same time. And we were not like a rehab hookup. I always stress that. We
Mhm.
dated for 6 years before we moved in together. We had a batting order. You know, our recovery came first, our respective families came second, and everything else, including each other, came third. And that's what we've kept it to.
Wow, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we work.
Mhm.
But I was telling him there's a writer in Chicago who's lovely that I don't really know. And she's so supportive of Stash. She posted when she reposts like my posts and shares them. And I was like, this is amazing. He's like, yeah, I hope you're doing that for other people. And I was like, oh, yeah, I need to do that for other people. Because she's
Exactly.
a pretty established writer and she's been a Reese's book club pick. And, it just is but I love that about writers, right? And
Yes.
she's also in recovery. So there's that as well.
Yes. I think just the recovery women wrote a book, and writing a book, I don't know how it was for you, was such a lonely process of going through so many emotions, and how many times I was sitting there writing. I mean, does anyone care about this story? Why am I telling this story right now? This particular one. Or why am I talking about my grandmother? Does anyone out there on the planet care about the story about my grandma? And you just start having that inner critic. But for me, there was like a calling, like I had to write the book. And a lot of people are like, are you going to write another one? Are you going to write another one? And I'm like, I don't know if I feel called, because it's hard. It's really hard to have that kind of discipline, especially for someone that is also running a big business and that's not part of it. It's a
Yeah.
really challenging thing to do.
I mean, yeah, it's an incredibly solo process. I actually wrote Stash in 6 months during the pandemic with my agent reading as I went along. So I wasn't quite in the same vacuum. She was literally reading every 30 pages as I wrote
Yeah.
them.
I had Kelly, so I know
Yeah,
what you mean. Yeah, I had
yeah,
Kelly who was working with me. And so I wasn't in on the load either, but still in your house.
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess it was also, I wrote mine during the pandemic. So it was this solo, world anyway.
yeah. And because, and I feel like this with my podcast as well, like we created in a vacuum, then we put it out.
Yes.
Um, and I only know how it's received if people give me feedback. Like, and I'll see the downloads, like there's a metric there, but I don't know how they feel about it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I love getting the feedback from, different places in the world and thinking, oh,
Yes.
I'm so glad this touched someone in Israel and China. Like, what is happening?
Mhm.
That to me has been the greatest gift. Are you writing another one?
I just finished my second book this morning.
What? Oh my God. And you heard it here first, people. I,
But
I had a feeling you were writing another
yeah, I've been writing. I started it. My agent and my publisher wanted me to write something auto fiction.
one.
And I'm not a fiction writer, so I kind of balked, and they convinced me over breakfast. This was actually right around this time last year. And so I took a how to write a novel class and started reading some books. I can't remember. It's like Save the Cat, which is like a famous, apparently, how to write a novel book. And I made a few attempts. I had a time period. It's really something, it's a true story of my life that needs to be fictionalized because it might hurt people.
Right.
So fictionalizing it was the only way to actually write this story.
Yeah.
Um, so I tried a couple of different times and my agent was like, this isn't it. Go back to one, go back to one, like 3 or 4 times over the summer. And then finally I sent her pages in December and I was like, she doesn't like these, that I'm done.
Right.
And she wrote me back right away and she's like, you got it. It's brilliant. Keep going.
Amazing.
So I did. So I've been writing since December. I have a really beautiful, thoughtful editor, writer, fiction writer, friend of mine reading it as I go. So
Amazing.
she's putting notes on it, which I will now go back and address those notes and then send it into the agent and see what happens next.
Amazing. I love it. Oh, I'm so excited.
Me
I'm,
too.
I'm open to read an early draft, just saying.
Yes, I will definitely send you one. Seriously.
I would love it. I
That
would
would be
love it.
fantastic. Thank you. But yeah, it's, that thing that you were talking about, how writing is solo, but this is the good part, right? Is that we kind of are forced because books don't sell themselves to reach out to other writers, to network, to see like how are you doing this and what's happening there. And the publishing industry has changed. Now you have to do this, now people are getting blurbs for book proposals instead of just books. I didn't
Mhm.
know that. I got asked to write 3 this year. So that was different than anything. It's like,
Wow.
yeah,
Didn't know
instead
that
of,
either.
isn't that crazy? It's just, I keep saying crazy. It's not crazy. It's just really different.
It is different, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. Well, it shows how difficult a book is to sell now,
Yes.
right? That you need endorsements from other authors before a publisher will look at it.
Right. Well, people don't read as much.
No, they don't. And but
And
I
that's
think a lot of people listen now.
I agree. I agree. A lot of people do listen.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to your boyfriend.
Yes.
So what is it like living and being in love with someone that's also at the same, I don't want to say level because everyone grows differently, but with the same amount of time? And what are some tricks? What are some people, what can you tell some people? What have been your greatest challenges in working together and both being in the program? And what have also been the greatest gifts?
Well, I'll say that, when I met Scott, I was turning 44 years old in 2 weeks. I was newly divorced, or I was actually not even divorced. I got divorced 3 months later. The divorce was finalized. And I was, I was raising my kids. Like I wasn't looking for that relationship, that new relationship where we were going to get married and have kids and raise a family. That wasn't the relationship I was looking for. In fact, I wasn't looking for any relationship. But what I found out I really needed in him was a partner in this because recovery was brand new for me. And I was reluctant, honestly, to engage with it. I did it because I was supposed to and because I didn't want to lose my kids, but I was not trying to be one of those people
Right.
that I had met throughout the years who were really
Right.
dedicated and devoted to
Right.
recovery. And Scott and I joke that I'm the head and he's the heart.
Mm,
Like I'm very logical. I get up, I'm a morning person. I get up, I work out, I sit down at my computer, I do my admin work, and then I write. Like that's my day.
mm,
And he's much more go with the flow. Um, he has his own work, but it's not on anybody else's schedule, even his own. Like, so we approach this very differently. He doesn't like it when I say he's spiritual, but he's very in tune with the energy around him.
I,
And I'm usually oblivious to it. We'll walk in a room and he'll say, "Oh, so and so sad. They look really happy today." Like, and I won't have even seen them. I'm
right.
just like, I'm focused on whatever I need to be focused on and I'm out. So he is I think we complement each other that way, and also especially in the beginning, I found his recovery very comforting, because he really wanted it. He was very happy to be in treatment, and he was also really devoted to the rooms of recovery and his own sobriety. And that was irritating at first. And then eventually I found it very comforting. And like, we travel a lot. The first thing we do when I'm planning a trip is to plan our meetings wherever we're going. Um,
Awesome.
the second thing we do is I ask them to empty the mini bar and fill it with all the stuff that we like to drink. The
Yes.
third thing I do is I tell the concierge that we're sober. I ask them, like, how close is this AA meeting that I found, to where you are, or whatever kind of meeting it is. And so everybody's like, we're tight. Like, everybody knows we can go to our meetings. And I don't know that I could do that with somebody who wasn't either as in as he is, or someone who just wasn't sober. I
Mhm.
think it would be a lot different relationship. I'm not saying that it's bad and that I wouldn't do it, but I really enjoy that aspect
That's
of our
great.
relationship. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I did the mini bar thing too. And I also found that a lot more than I anticipated. And certainly in the beginning, when I would go to the concierge, I would go to the concierge and ask. And they actually had a list of like meetings that were close. And I
Yes.
thought that was so amazing.
Yeah. More and more. Um,
Definitely.
I actually had a concierge chase us out into the street once when we were getting into a car, going to a dinner that he had arranged for us, and knocked on the window and said, "Miss Cathcart, Miss Robbins, whatever your last name is." Both, right? They have brandy in the dessert I recommended, and I needed to let you know.
Oh, I love
Oh,
that.
yeah. I said, "That's so sweet." I would have figured it out when I
I would have
saw the
figured it
menu.
out immediately. It would have been
But
just
I really appreciate, like, he was,
that is so nice.
isn't that nice? This was like, I was just like, it gave him, a very nice gratuity, and just like really just appreciated that care around my recovery. But,
Absolutely.
but because I contacted him, like you said, he knew that I cared about it
Right.
and that
Right.
it was important to me.
Right. Was this the Four Seasons?
It was.
They're so like that. I knew it.
It was the Four Seasons in San Francisco, actually,
I knew
which
it.
is kind of more corporate,
Yeah,
than resorty. But yeah, it was great.
definitely, definitely. So I ask this question a lot. What do you look at vulnerability as a weakness, or did you? And then at what time did it maybe change into a strength of yours or a superpower of yours?
Yeah, I absolutely scoffed at vulnerability. I did think it was a weakness. I felt sorry for people who got vulnerable in that way, and it made me very uncomfortable. I did not want to be around it for years and years and years.
Mhm.
And, eventually, by necessity, if I was going to do this thing, if I was really, like you said, quitting was easy, but staying sober was the work. And if I was going to do this work, I needed to get vulnerable myself. And what I understood then was that under that skepticism, was fear.
Yes.
I was terrified of being vulnerable. And I don't even know if I crystallized in my head what I was terrified of. Like, if I'm vulnerable, this happens or this happens. I don't think that was a thought, but I just knew it was bad for me. Like, I couldn't even look at it because I was so terrified of it. And, so the first time I was vulnerable, it was very uncomfortable. Probably the second and third time. And, now I'm a really private person, Elisa. Like my friends don't hear me talk about religion or politics or what goes on in the bathroom or the bedroom. Like I'm private like that.
Mhm.
But this part of my life, the life-saving part of my life, I saved my life by being vulnerable and talking about the things that I kept secret.
Exactly.
Because the secrets are what are going to take me down. They're a very slippery slope for me. I've grasped and developed a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. And if I tell you I'm 5 minutes away when I haven't left the house, you can better believe you're getting a call back from me 2 seconds later saying, I don't know why I said that. I actually am still in the house. Do you still want me to come?
Right.
Because I won't be there for 20 minutes, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, so that is honesty, but it is also vulnerable for me telling the truth, you know?
It is so important. Just that slight shift in, no, no, I always say, I'll say something and I'm like, no, 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 I think I'm lying. Like, that's not even true.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? But I know, I remember when you were just talking about vulnerability, I not only wasn't I vulnerable, but I didn't even really know how. I didn't like learn that skill. And I remember distinctly having a fight with a friend of mine and her calling me the next day and saying, I was up all night thinking about what you said. And I thought to myself, what is wrong with her? What did you do? Sit on your bed all night, just twiddling your thumbs, thinking
Yeah.
about what I said? Like,
Yeah.
who does that?
Right.
It really struck me as like something's wrong with her.
Yeah.
Why would she do that? Why would she think about something? And then why would she tell me?
Right.
That's so bizarre.
It does feel bizarre.
It felt bizarre to me. I just didn't understand it. And it took a long time. And you're right, the secrets and what lies underneath it is the fear, but it was also a skill set for me, vulnerability that I had to learn and get comfortable with. I was not comfortable with other women at all when I first got sober. And so I got myself a sponsor and I didn't know at the time. And she is gay. And she would then, when she found out I was very uncomfortable with women, made me go to all gay women's meetings. And I would share, you know, da, 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 and women this and women that. And they would all come up to me afterwards and give me a hug and a kiss. And we
Yeah.
love you. We just love you, Elisa. And I was like, oh my God, it's so uncomfortable. But they taught me how to love women and they taught me how to appreciate women and they taught me how to be friends with women and that was the greatest gift
Mm.
of my lifetime was to be able to have amazing close friends that are women.
I love that. I love that. And of course, the solution is to be around more women,
Of
right?
course, she knew
That's
that. You
it's
knew
the only
that.
solution. It's the beauty, and I love that you said that because what I heard you say was, we get to practice in those rooms, right? And then we take that out into our life and put those principles into play, right? And it really was vulnerability was quite, I always say practice makes a practice. So I
Yes,
have vulnerability practice now, but it really took a lot of years of practice for me to hone that
exactly.
that practice.
Yeah, same, same. All right, what is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, the best advice that I've ever been given. Um, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you a couple. One is feelings are like children. You don't want them driving the car, but you don't want to throw them in the trunk. So
Oh, I like that. It's like
I
a
like
riddle.
it.
I love it.
Yeah. And to not let my feelings dictate my actions, which seems really counterintuitive because why else would I act on anything unless I felt like I should?
Mhm.
But especially in early sobriety, that was important for me not to just impulsively act on something, but to really kind of run it through the the wash, as it were, maybe
Right.
run it by somebody, maybe sit with it. One of the best presents anybody gave me was a glitter jar. Are you familiar with those?
No, do I need a glitter jar? What is
You
it?
do. So it's just like a mason jar. She made it for me, and it's filled with glycerin and some other kind of viscous fluid. And there's glitter in there. Mine is purple. And
Uh-huh.
so when I have a dilemma or I want to act impulsively on something, when I remember to, I shake up this jar like a snow
Mhm.
globe, and I
Right.
wait for it to settle before I act. The jar has to be clear before I can act.
Wow.
And usually that's 10 minutes of settling.
Mhm.
Sometimes I meditate on it, like I stare at it with like a soft gaze and watch the glitter settling.
Is there like a to-go glitter jar?
Yeah,
Because I'm like
yes,
running around all day and I need the to-go one where I could just shake it up and be like, nope,
yeah.
all right, get back in the car.
No, she made a little plastic one for me, like a
Uh,
mini one to keep in the car. I haven't seen
love
her in a
that.
long time, but it's still really one of the best gifts I ever got. But it's that pause.
Totally.
That pause is one of the best things I've ever done for myself. It helped me to parent my children. It helped me when, my ex-husband and I were figuring out co-parenting. It always helps me in my relationship with Scott. It helps me with the women that I work with in recovery. It
Mhm.
definitely helps me in business.
Yes.
It's like, because I want to fire off that email back and like, are
Yeah.
you kidding me right now?
Right. Right. I've definitely gotten better.
Yes.
But yeah, my impulsivity will come out like very
Yeah.
quickly. Very
Yeah.
quickly.
I mean, it still does, but I have a tool now for when I remember.
100%. 100%.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
also, I think for me, it was also like you talked a lot about feelings and that they're not indicators of what we should do next.
Hmm.
And they are different. And when I learned this, I understood a little bit more because when someone tells me my feelings aren't to be acted on, that doesn't intellectually make sense. Well, then why am I having it?
Yeah.
But then they explain, no, your emotions, which are automatic and which everyone feels, anger, fear, those are meant to be acted on at times because they're saving you and they're instinctual.
Yes.
Your feelings are subjective based on your own memories and experiences.
Hmm.
And that is a narrative that you might have created. And so that's why you can't trust your feelings as opposed to your emotions.
I love that. I love that. And it's a little bit like instinct versus intuition too.
Exactly.
Both of those things I had to learn about, again in recovery and learn to tell, make the distinction between the two.
Mhm.
Because my instincts are there to protect me, right?
Yeah,
Balls coming at my head, I'm going to catch it, right? Someone's running in the street, I'm going to grab them, they're important. And my intuition is really important, but I couldn't tell the difference between my feelings and my intuition for a long time.
of course, because we didn't even have an intuition because we were dulling it down.
Yes.
We were like,
Yeah.
what is that? Is that a voice? Someone
Yeah.
saying something? Is that a feeling? I remember the first time I got sick in sobriety, and I was like, I think I might be sick because that was like the first time I felt like my body was not the same. And I knew
Ah,
it wasn't it having to do with drugs or alcohol. And I was like, oh my God, I'm actually nauseous. I think
yes.
I might be sick.
Isn't
Crazy.
it funny?
Crazy. Well,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. It's not crazy. It is what it is. And this isn't the stuff that they teach you. And I think this is why I felt like it was so imperative to write because this isn't all the stuff that they teach you I love 12 step. It helped me get sober. It saved my life. And it taught me how to live as a sober woman. But the other things that I think were really important, I had to go and learn and
Yeah.
read and meet new people and be curious and ask questions. And so that is why I wanted to talk more about my own experience.
Well, this is why the world is so much better with you in it, because you are a resource for people who have found their way to sobriety but need more.
Mm,
So when people find their way to you and what you do, they are able to reap the benefit of all the curiosity of yours, the questions that you asked, the
mm.
practices that you've developed.
That is very, very sweet. Thank you for saying that.
True. It's true.
Well, I adore you. This was really fun and really great. And I get to see you in like 2 more weeks
I
in
can't wait.
person.
Yeah.
And we have a big job to do in changing the name of the
Yes.
genre. So
Yeah.
we're going to take that on because I think it's important. And if we're
Right.
both feeling that, like, then no, then it's a
Yeah.
no.
It's a no. It's a no. So we'll have to come up with something. We can like email back and forth with some
Mhm,
suggestions and then
mhm.
see how we go forward with it.
Definitely. Let's ask
And
some
Holly on board.
Holly and Ford. Let's ask some other people what they think.
Yeah.
And
It's
ask them
named
back.
after her book, it's named after Quit Like a Woman.
Mm.
So she's really the origin for it, but she
Oh,
doesn't endorse it.
did she endorse it?
She didn't endorse the name, no. So
Okay. She's open to changing it. Great.
100%. Yeah. So we'll
All
work
right.
on it. Okay.
All right. It was lovely to see you, and I will talk to
Wonderful to see
you
you.
soon. Thank you so much for everything and being so open and honest and vulnerable.
Thank you, Elisa.
Okay, bye.